Salutations everybody, it is Matty here today, sitting down to have a very tough conversation about Starfield. I say tough for a lot of the audience out there because this is a topic that I have dedicated an entire video to, but today it feels more relevant than ever. Today we are talking about the possibility of Starfield being a launch at 30 FPS on consoles. We've already seen how that went with Redfall, and due to that conversation, people are now looking ahead into Xbox's schedule and just wondering how far this 30 FPS train will go. Especially when you look at Gotham Knights and A Plague Tale Requiem, people are seeing it's not just a one-off, but a thing that's popping up a decent amount of times in recent history, where it's not a far cry, a crazy idea to suggest that Starfield, a very big, ambitious game, may be locked at 30 frames per second on consoles. Now, I say all of this because when I did sit down to have that conversation, I read the comments and I saw a handful of people in the video going, "Oh, hey, it's Mr. Matty, the negative YouTuber, trying to get some hate clicks." Oh, I promise you, lying to you, pissing you off, making you upset with me does not benefit anything I do here whatsoever. I just realized a lot of people weren't ready for that topic. I hope today we are, because it looks like it may be a reality. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, if you're new here and you're into Starfield news and information, speculation, all that good stuff, consider subscribing. Let's start off at the root of the conversation and how it all began. As we previously covered on the channel, Xbox and Bethesda, as of the time of recording, haven't reversed decision at all, but are launching Redfall at 30 FPS on consoles, with the plans for a performance mode at 60 frames per second to be added later on. Now, that's a whole conversation into itself, but naturally, as I said earlier, people are starting to look ahead into Bethesda's schedule and wonder what other games may hit that 30 FPS benchmark, and Starfield is number one on everyone's list. And there's a number of reasons why this is the case. Beyond any speculation, I think we should just take it from the horse's mouth, right? Here's a quote from Todd Howard while on the Lex Friedman podcast when speaking about fidelity, frame rate, and what Bethesda Game Studios prefers.
But is there a trade-off in the experience, the feel of the game, in terms of realism and story?
Usually we will start with let the player have as much agency and do as many things as they can as possible. And we will sacrifice some graphic fidelity for that, some speed for that. You know, we could make a game that, you know, traditionally our games are, you know, we okay with 30 frames a second as long as it looks really good and the simulation's running and all of those things. So we'll sacrifice some of that fidelity for the player experience in the kind of things that I do.
To me, the conversation can cut right there, honestly. Todd Howard says for himself they're okay with their games being 30 frames for the type of game they do, and that as long as the simulation's running, which are all the immersive elements that we're familiar with in a Bethesda Game Studios game, as long as that's accomplished, then the 60 frames can kind of go screw themselves. And that will be disheartening for a lot of people. But like I mentioned in our Redfall conversation, I have this conspiracy theory, and it is just that it's possible maybe this news was rolled out to sort of test the waters and see what's the reaction if we don't deliver the expectations on frame rate as an exclusive game. And now we know. The most conversation we've seen around Redfall was when that news dropped, which is unfortunate for the game because it is shaping up to look like a pretty decent one, frame rate aside. But now we're seeing all the negative attention brought to it, and I do wonder if Xbox will end up sticking to their guns. I personally think they're going to, although there may be that conversation on a delay. But make no mistake that they're taking a look at this reception and going, so Starfield, this one is the one that is, I say with all due respect, from my personal perspective, and I'd say I share this perspective with a lot of fans in the Xbox community, the big one though. Not that Redfall isn't important, clearly based off the reaction from fans, it is important, but there's no denying that Starfield is the big game for Xbox, this statement game, more than any others. I think even I'll go to the length of saying if Starfield can deliver on every single promise and nail it, people will kind of put Redfall in the rear view as just a bad optics moment. less than a this is dooming the Xbox generation, like people are saying it very well may be the start of, because what about Hellblade now? What about Avowed? What's the standard for these exclusives? And I get it, right? Because at the end of the day, when you have developers celebrating less SKUs and saying it gives us time to focus on this, and you're having one game come out for, in the case of Xbox, multiple platforms being PC and Xbox, you'd hope that they would hit the standard for first-person shooters at 60 frames. Now, with what Todd Howard said aside, there are other reasons why people are a bit fearful about 30 frames per second. Look no further than 2022's gameplay, where when we saw Starfield, yeah, it was a hard 30. It looked like quality mode, 4K, 30 FPS, and we could already see some of the sacrifices being made. How so? Something like no gore, when the guy took out the shotgun and fired away in the opening moments of the gameplay, and he didn't burst into bits a la Fallout. Something about that felt off. And it was only noticeable to me upon closer inspection, but once you realized it, you thought a bit more about some sacrifices that could be made here to get Starfield running. Now, here's where I sit in the camp of Starfield being 30 FPS versus Redfall. Again, I say this with all due respect, and I know a lot of developers won't be crazy about this take, but I'm honest, I'm doing my job here. The reality is Starfield is really an ambitious video game, and it's not that Redfall isn't. We've heard in countless interviews from Harvey Smith how challenging this game was. It has untethered multiplayer, meaning your friend can go to one end of the map, you can be in the opposite corner, and the game's not going to tell you both to get together. So you can explore at your own pace, wherever you want, whenever you want. That's really cool. They're also reversing the online-only decision. It may come after launch. That's something fans are willing to be patient with. So there are things that they are overcoming as a team. You know, it's an online co-op open world game, first of its kind for this team. So it is an ambitious game for Arcane. But in the terms of the industry, we have seen co-op open world before. I'm excited to see what Arcane does with their typical flair of level design and now vampires involved and supernatural abilities, how it all comes together to make something unique. But when you look at Starfield with the settlements, spaceship crafting, flying around, landing on planets, things happening in space, the scale of the game, 1,000+ planets, big, right? Where I do believe if the conversation does begin for Starfield being 30 frames per second, I anticipate it's going to be more 50-50 than what happened with Redfall. With Redfall, I would say, based off what I read online, which obviously isn't the definitive statement, it's still possible that Redfall breaks personal records for Arcane and they hit high player counts, which I really am still hoping they do. But I think the conversation there was maybe 70-30 in favor of delay this thing. This is pretty awful. I can't believe they're actually doing this with a big exclusive coming out for Xbox. Whereas with Starfield, given the ambition and all the mechanics and scale it's touting, I do think the community's come to understand that there may be a concession made somewhere. And when you got Todd floating out hints like he has in the Lex Friedman podcast, it's again starting to spell itself out. And now you see Redfall taking that first step to soften the PR blow. But I do think truly Starfield will be that 50-50 conversation. A lot of people saying, look, who cares? And I get it, right? Because Starfield is a first-person shooter, but it's also an exploration game. It's a crafting game. It looks like it's many other things where it's not Redfall, which is solely fast-paced, action-packed first-person shooting. Would I prefer that both these games be 60 at launch? Yes. Will I stand on my square with that? Yes. Would I be less upset about Starfield being 30 compared to Redfall? Quite frankly, to some degree, yes. When you're doing a little bit more, I'm going to give you a little bit more rope. That's all there is to it in my personal approach with my coverage. It's not something like Redfall, which reminds me a bit of Far Cry, and I don't know if that's a compliment or an insult, depending on who you are, where I am expecting 60 from a game that is another open world completion checklist style game. Whereas with Starfield, it does feel like that industry boundary pushing style game where if you come out and say you're 30, I'm going to go, that sucks, but I'm willing to accept it. I also think the reason it'll be 50-50, let's be frank, Bethesda Game Studios games are best on PC, and most of their player base is going to be over there with their mods, and so they'll be doing just fine. And I think that'll be another reason why the conversation offsets itself, and Bethesda Game Studios will come out of it, I don't want to say unscathed, but I think they'll come out less damaged and be able to weather that storm. But what's really interesting here is Xbox's decision making. I think that is the sort of final piece of the puzzle here. If they care about quality, which they should, if they care about being in what I'll say is first place and not being the silver medal specialist, as I've been putting it, then they need to start pushing the quality boundaries for their games. That means Redfall cannot launch unless it has 60 FPS, which may sound extreme to some, but when you set a bar and you set a level, these are the messages you're sending to your consumers. To me, when I hear, okay, Redfall, big Xbox exclusive, it's only coming out to our systems and you're not getting the best possible experience here. Well, what kind of message does that send to your fans? I think it sends to them, you can go over to the Switch and get more 30 frames per second experiences if you're okay with that. You can go over to PlayStation and get blockbuster experiences like God of War Ragnarok at 60 frames per second. And look, no concessions. Like, game looks beautiful, runs well, 10 out of 10 game for many people, and they didn't have to sacrifice the thing, it feels like. If Xbox is okay with taking that L and being the silver medal specialist, that's the bed they want to make, then they got to lie in it, and they have to be okay with that. But if they truly do care about quality, which I do believe they do, I do think it would make sense. I'm saying do a lot in this sentence, I apologize, but I believe they would want to move Redfall back. Here's where the complicated issue steps in for all these games that would require some form of a delay to get that 60 frames energy. It would move the Xbox pipeline back further. And I'm not talking about from the 2022 delay to 2023, now even maybe 2024 we're talking. Actually, what I mean by that is there are rumors about something like Hellblade 2 coming out in November. It's possible Xbox looks at the calendar and let's say Arcane comes in and says, we need 5 months. We need 5 months to get Redfall to 60 frames on consoles. Can we get that? And they go, well, that was actually Forza's window. Forza got delayed there. So Forza's supposed to come out in October and Starfield's coming out in September. So we need that back to back. And then Hellblade was coming out in November. So I'm sorry, but like, you got to come out now. It's your time now. And that's the unfortunate reality of what I've talked about. One of my fears is I call it Xbox shotgun blast. I've said for a while, I think it's going to be a good time, but blasting all those games out, now we got to recoup. Now we got to rebuild, restock, and it's going to be another drought. Spreading it out would be best, but there's the business sensibility there. I got to get corporate for a moment of Xbox realizing we're continuing to invest in these things and they're just never coming out. And I do think that Starfield's delay would be the final one. But to bring it all back to the center, will Starfield be 30 frames? I would happily put money on it. I really would be surprised if it wasn't. And if it isn't, what a pleasant surprise that is. And it unfortunately will do a little bit of splash damage to Redfall, I think, in going, wow, how did one end up this way and the other ended up with 60 when one looks more ambitious than the other? But I do think if Xbox wants to send their fans into overdrive, you got to deliver that 60 frames, because it goes back to what I said about Game Pass, that unbelievable level of quality that's there, and that over delivery of quality, and your biggest moment will count long term more than, shortchanging, penny pinching, and delivering a less quality product that you'll see minimal gain. All this is done to grow Game Pass. And if you want to do that, over deliver on value as you have, but now from your first party, it's time to really put your money where your mouth is. Invest hard. You can do this. Microsoft's at your back. From my perspective, it seems quite feasible, and go from there. But yes, the fear is growing that Starfield will be 30 frames. I think some people are coming to grips with it already, which is why we're having the conversation again. I think given the news with Redfall, it's probably going to happen. And I do think it's going to be that 50-50 split. We'll see if Xbox changes course, though, because this is the position they've put themselves in. So many fans have said, well, you got to get these games out, bro. But I've always been team delay. Give me the best possible game. There's so many things coming out. We can wait. We can wait. I know a lot of fans don't want to hear that, but I really do believe we can wait. I just don't know if Xbox is willing to accept that PR blast once more with another round of delays. Because, yeah, no doubt, it stings. It continues to sting. And so now they're in a rock and a hard place. Do we delay again? Of course, that would be another PR disaster, but do we just announce 30 FPS? Can we weather the storm? So it goes back to what I said. Redfall walks, Starfield runs. If Redfall succeeds at 30 frames, I guarantee there's like luck in Starfield, man. We're fine. These people can whine on Twitter. They can whine in their YouTube videos, have their conversations. It doesn't matter because at the end of the day, we got this check here in our bank account and it's looking pretty nice. So that's my ultimate take here on what's going on with the growing fear of Starfield's 30 frames per second. And I'm curious as to your take. Do you disagree? Do you think that it's actually going to be 60? Do you think Xbox will reverse course? I'm very keen to get your thoughts on this, so please do fire away. Other than that, be sure to follow me on Twitter, follow me on Instagram. Those links are in the description down below. And a big thank you to all the patrons, all the members who continue to support the hell out of the content here. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.